In 1712, the first commercial steam engine was invented, and the world would never be the same. Over the coming centuries, more and better machines were invented, each having the ability to radically increase humanity's productive capacity. But humans didn't become obsolete. Rather, our labor could now be harnessed in ways previously unthinkable. Agriculture, which had been, by necessity, the focus for human labor for millennia, finally began to lose its dominance over the human experience. Arguably, nothing in history has been as all-encompassing in changing the way we live as the Industrial Revolution. But the rise of industry is not a story of pure positive progress. The benefits of industrialization were initially distributed amongst a very small upper class, who owned the ports, the mines, canals, and later railways and factories. Governments, which had only just adapted to the weakening of the aristocracy and the rise of merchants, were in for another shock. Companies began to spring up, some more powerful than entire countries, through privilege and corruption, having immense influence over national governments. Democracy, which we take as self-evident, was not as total as it should have been. When Britain began to industrialize, only about 5% of the adult male population could vote, with a strict wealth requirement for voting rights and no female participation at all. This fact was crucial, as it was clear that the British government did not consider itself a neutral arbiter between capital and labor. Instead, it sided fully with the wealthy elites. Laws were passed to enforce the new industrial reality. The Master and Servants Act criminalized leaving your job without permission, missing a shift, or refusing an order from your boss. The punishment for these acts could be as high as a prison sentence. In some ways, it seemed like society was regressing back to forms of oppression previously abolished, while the new capitalists argued that such measures were crucial to harness the new productive forces. Parliament, far from restricting the excesses of the Industrial Revolution, began working diligently to entrench the new reality. Within the US, we saw a similar story, as most of you will know of the Gilded Age, a period of two simultaneous truths: amazing technological and economic progress, while inequality reached new heights in the land of the free. Here too, a new upper class developed, who became wealthier than anybody in history had ever been. They did this primarily through monopolies. Carnegie owned 60% of US steel production. Rockefeller owned 80% of American oil, while JP Morgan dominated the financial institutions. In a way, a new form of aristocracy was forming, as these fabulously wealthy men were accountable to no one, and the US government, extremely small and humble compared to today, seemed unable and unwilling to put limits on these industrial robber barons. The dark side of unrestrained corporatism swiftly revealed itself. These monopolies didn't just hurt the working class, they were harmful to all layers of society. Competition was ruthlessly strangled, hurting innovation and progress in several fields. They fixed prices to drive up personal profits, to the detriment of both the consumer and other companies reliant on the monopoly's goods. The economy as a whole suffered greatly from the success of a few. An unregulated drive to profit led to horrible abuses, like sawdust making their way into food, spoiled meat sold after being reprocessed with chemicals, child labor being allowed, and unsafe working conditions costing people their life or limb. Despite the explosion in available industrial goods, low-wage workers were often unable to afford what they themselves produced. Massive families lived in single-room homes, while the environmental costs were also immense, as forests were stripped, rivers were blackened with industrial muck, and landscapes were reshaped in pursuit of profit. Yet eventually, change was in the air. The rise of industry forced the lower classes to concentrate in cities. where they lived closer to the elites than they had before, making the growing inequality that much more visible. This proximity also gave the workers immense collective bargaining power, as they organized themselves in trade unions, called strikes, and put pressure on political life. Meanwhile, journalists were exposing abuses from corporations and corruption in government, and public opinion began to turn. Within Britain, several revolutionary scares gradually saw voting rights expanded to include the working class, and slowly but steadily, the role of government shifted to protecting rather than constraining the working class. Within the US, we saw this pressure cause the growth of the progressive movement, which sought radical change. Both parties in Congress saw a gradual rise in these progressive voices, but the re-election of Roosevelt in 1904 gave the biggest mandate to the progressives they had ever seen, as they set about reforming the economy for the better. The Roosevelt administration set out to break up monopolies, implement worker protections, create consumer protections, and environmental regulations. Progressivism also didn't die with him. Woodrow Wilson furthered the progressive agenda by implementing a progressive income tax system and setting up the Federal Trade Commission to fight unfair business practices and new monopolies. The US government had finally taken the crucial role upon itself to regulate the excesses of corporations. Now, crucially, these regulations did not destroy the Industrial Revolution, let alone capitalism itself. If anything, they were only strengthened. An economy built up on exploitation slowly gave way to a far more cooperative one. Of course, not everyone immediately benefited, and inequality has remained, but the amount of winners increased substantially. Wages rose, quality of life increased, and the economy flourished as competition drove innovation and better business practices. The lesson the US had learned was that letting unrestricted corporatism run wild caused immense hardship to society, the environment, and the functioning of a fair and public democracy. The next revolution on the same scale was the digital revolution. Computers began as a niche technology, gigantic machines useful only for very specialized tasks. By 1974, personal computers brought the digital revolution into our homes, and by today, everybody carries computers in our pocket. Simultaneously, machine learning and artificial intelligence were in development, and arguably broke into the mainstream in 1997, when reigning world champion Garry Kasparov was defeated by Deep Blue, a machine learning model focused on chess. Enthusiasm and speculation rose substantially, and in the decades following, machine learning has become capable of learning many singular tasks and simple games. But this form of machine learning has a major restriction. It was focused on a single task. Deep Blue dominated in chess, but if asked to play checkers, it would lose against a 5-year-old. The program had not been taught to play anything other than chess. Yet the scope of AI would expand with the advent of large language models, brought into the mainstream by ChatGPT. The frontier of AI was no longer targeted. It would now focus on everything. AI models were fed as much data as possible, then adjusted to give human-like responses to any input. Upon release, ChatGPT was a novelty, with frequent and obvious mistakes and limited use cases. But in just a few years, the quality of AI has skyrocketed. The next milestone all tech companies claim to be sprinting towards is AGI, Artificial General Intelligence. An AI model which can do any task at the competency of a genius human, capable of teaching itself without human intervention. Already within the past 5 years, these new AI have caused gigantic ramifications. Traditional educational institutions are being hollowed out, as both teachers and students struggle to come to terms with homework and essays having made as easy as pressing a button. Mental health issues are being amplified by a way too agreeable AI tool being used as a therapist or as a friend. Economically speaking, the concrete effects have so far been restricted to limited and dubious layoffs, but AI is explicitly meant to cause an economic disruption on a scale never seen before. If AGI is successfully achieved, a cheap Einstein-level genius could work nearly every job. Services make up 80% of labor in Western countries and about 50% of the global labor force. And it just so happens, AGI is coming for those jobs first. What jobs then would even be left for humans, except the hard labor AGI doesn't, yet, have a body for? On paper, the world these AI companies promise us sounds great. Productivity exploding, science advancing faster than ever before, scarcity in many fields being solved, and humanity being given unparalleled free time as completely autonomous supply chains run the global economy. But there are many reasons to doubt this view, perhaps even to actively resist it, especially if you are not a part of the upper 1% of society. The reason I started this video with the Industrial Revolution is that on the whole, the transformation of society it has allowed has been fantastic. Despite its excesses and flaws, it has effectively created the modern world, and the many comforts it has brought with it. But most of the benefits to broader society have only been made possible because the population put pressure on the government to step in. To ensure we are protected from bad actors, to ensure the spoils of progress were more fairly distributed, to ensure monopolies did not strangle the innovations upon which they were built. In the AGI revolution that tech companies try to sell us, I see threats to society far greater than with the Industrial Revolution. Yes, it does have the potential to radically increase humanity's production, to free up labor, to create excesses of goods, but it could just as easily cause massive harm by destroying social fabrics, flood social media and art with slop, and create unparalleled economic inequality. In my view, we must act now to protect ourselves against these most harmful effects, as we may not have the luxury to wait for as long as we did during the Industrial Revolution for 3 key reasons. The first is a crucial difference in scale and time. The Industrial Revolution was very rapid, historically speaking, yet it still took decades for industrialization to catch on in Britain, decades more before it began to spread to other countries, and the Gilded Age reached its peak. The societal and environmental impacts were unprecedented, so we had no institutions to check them. Thus, it took decades for governments to respond to them. But AI progress has so far been measured in years and in months, and once the issues reach a breaking point, it may already be too late. Then second problem, AGI poses a far more immediate risk to humanity. We cannot control our current models, let alone smarter ones. Creators of these AI have no idea how they even work. This is not AI fearmongering. The leading scientists and tech CEOs have publicly admitted that humanity may be destroyed by AI. An AGI, by definition smarter than its very creators, could easily breach the lab, and the entire internet could become corrupted and unsafe before we even realize it. But the third problem worries me most. We saw in both Britain and the US that what was necessary to curb the excesses of corporatism during the Industrial Revolution was us, the people themselves. Even with factories, these machines were worthless without a large, cooperative pool of workers. Meanwhile, the concentration within cities and the inequality with the elites readily visible gave workers a strong position of collective bargaining, which eventually caused the halls of power to step in. That worries me most about the AGI revolution in the way the tech leaders try to sell it. The exact opposite will happen. Rather than forcing humanity together, AI will individualize labor and society. The few workers which are still required don't need to live in the same country, let alone in the same city. That will make cooperation to force better conditions if government or companies overstep far more difficult. What bargaining power do you and I have once companies run primarily on AGI? What can we threaten when we are economically irrelevant, only passive consumers in a world run by AI? Today, the wealthiest people on Earth are nearly all tech billionaires. A small, inaccessible class living far away from us. Once their AGI dream is realized, they are in no way accountable to us. Once most service jobs are replaced with genius-level AGI, we will see unemployment on a previously unforeseen scale. We are at serious risk of becoming horses after the success of the car. Best case, we may get something like universal income, where we live in relative comfort, but still give up our independence fully. And then we could very well wonder, will humanity as a whole go the way of the horse? Our last line of defense, as the common people, is unfortunately still the government. In that regard, we are lucky this is not the 18th century anymore. Governments know how to regulate, they don't have to learn as during the Gilded Age. Especially through international cooperation, we are better at regulating than ever. Major threats like nuclear and bioweapons are successfully restricted. But despite the known potential issues of AGI, few governments are acting. They fear losing a global AGI arms race, and they fear upsetting Wall Street. But this is not something we should be taking this risk on. We, the people of the Western world, and especially Americans, where most of the leading AI firms are based, need to appeal to our governments to intervene now, before we reach a point where we no longer can. Now, don't take this as me being a Luddite, completely opposed to AI. That is not the case. While I generally don't like generative AI in the fields of art and entertainment, the value of something like ChatGPT is very clear to me. And I do myself use it, primarily as a search engine for possible sources to read. But regulation did not kill the Industrial Revolution, and regulation won't kill AI. With preventative regulations, we can keep the innovation going while installing guardrails against the worst negative impacts we know it can have. Many proposals already exist, like Anthony Aguirre's essay, Keep the Future Human. We could put structural limits on the types of AI that can be developed, closing the door on AGI, but instead focusing on targeted models. Autonomous and intelligent systems are great, fantastic at solving a single task. An intelligent and general system still needs a human to undertake action. Autonomous and general systems don't have the intelligence to pose a true threat. All these examples advance the same goal: keep AI as a tool for humanity, amplifying our strength rather than overpowering us. Other proposals include broader oversight of AI companies. For example, international tracking on large concentrations of compute, so we can be sure that no bad actor is racing towards AGI. Hard caps on computational power in single models are likewise possible. And due to the strong concentration of the global chip market in only a few actors, such measures are possible through US-Chinese cooperation. Because, in its current form, AI is so computationally and energy intensive, these simple measures would make it near impossible for non-authorized actors to develop AGI. So in conclusion, these regulations are not meant to halt the march of progress. They are simply an outright necessity in the complex, globalized, industrial digital world of today. It is about enforcing accountability, transparency, and public interests on those behind the technology, placing democratic oversight on undemocratic institutions. The most optimal and efficient path forwards is not unrestricted, ruthless corporatism, a dire repetition of the Gilded Age with a chance for a far worse outcome. It is regulating this fantastic technology to ensure it works for the benefit of us all, that it doesn't destroy humanity as we know it, and it doesn't make you and me obsolete in the minds of the tech elite.